Welcome home, my leadership friends. I love saying welcome home, my leadership friends, because leadership isn't just something we do at the office. It's a way of living. And in our families, in our friendships, and yes, even in the way we think about giving opinions. Today's episode is about opinion research and employees' opinions. Guess what? Different opinions come from different levels of management, different levels of ownership, and today, we're diving into something that is near and dear to me and that sounds simple, but it's far more complicated than employee opinions and opinion research by itself. The first part we're going to talk about is the misperception of opinion. And people who don't live in the world of market research often don't realize how wrong we can be in terms of our misperceptions, because perceptions are reality. That's a kind way to say it, right? We hold misperceptions. Here's the thing, our perceptions shape our reality. If an employee perceives that finishing their task is enough and they just stop short of excellence, then they may not even think to ask, what else can I do to help the team? But leadership teaches us that perception is not always reality. And that's why opinion research helps and exists. But we've sort of forgotten it. A lot of research firms actually called themselves such and such opinions or opinion researchers. And one of my favorite researchers, Roy Bardsley, he had an opinion research firm. You can use a research firm to test what people think is true. At home, at work, anywhere, there are opinions. A short history of polling. Polling has been surprisingly rich in history. George Gallup is the famous one. In the 1930s, he helped pioneer scientific polling, proving you could predict elections and public opinion without asking everyone. That's basically the laws of sampling and sampling variability. But before him, newspapers like the Literary Digest had a poll mailing to millions of people postcards. Sounds impressive, but in 1936, they famously predicted that Alf Landon would crush FDR. Spoiler alert, FDR won by a landslide. Why? Because the postcards were mailed mostly to wealthier Americans with telephones and cars, not representative of the voting population. And when I used to do voting research and opinion polling, and we were the selected group to do the Oregonian polls, I'd get calls from angry people where their polls had misperceptions. And one of my first questions was always, where did you get your list? Did you have a list of registered voters? Which is actually something that you could come across by free at that point in my career. I think you usually have to pay a little something now, but it's actually minimal to get access to a list of registered voters. And if you're a market researcher, you can do that. And that way, you aren't talking to people who aren't even going to vote. And then on top of that, did you screen for likely voters? Because guess what? There are people that are registered to vote and haven't voted in the last 5 elections. That's not the person that you want taking the poll. People make mistakes by getting the opinions of the wrong people all the time. There are legendary mistakes when you're trying to predict outcomes like elections. This cemented the need for careful representative opinion research. The greatest generation in polls happened during World War II and after, and the greatest generation embraced polling. They believed that when someone asked for their opinion, they should give it, and it mattered. And they also believed that when they go to the voting booth, it should be, something that is confidential. And polls and surveys worked really hard to make sure that people's opinions were confidential. And we didn't have things leaking online and hacking and all these things because everything was done on paper back in the day. Hardly any computers could communicate to each other, right? Participating in surveys was neighborly, and people were more neighborly back then, almost patriotic to participate. They helped build America's democratic backbone, in my mind, not just by storming beaches or building factories, but by chipping in their thoughts. Trusting that data shaped better decisions is what happened, even though most people don't think about data that way. Today, by contrast, we say, we're too busy. And I think, really? Are we too busy? Too busy to click on a poll that takes 90 seconds or 5 minutes or 15 minutes? We'll delay streaming Netflix to rewatch The Office for the 14th time, or in my case, Cars and Coffee with Seinfeld. But we'll sit through 3 cat videos on TikTok. But pull, nah, not going to do it. Who cares about democracy? That shouldn't be the way it is. Hopefully, it will get a rebound and people will realize how important it is. One of the things that I used to speak about to universities was how many important decisions never even make it to voting, and they are settled by a poll. You need to think about, you may not get a chance to participate if you do not participate in a poll. And there are lots of people like you, maybe not exactly like you, you're perfect, but there are people like you who need to be represented. So you should give your opinion. And one of the things that people don't realize when they're giving an opinion for a poll is you're supposed to give it for yourself, right? When you vote for something, you're supposed to be voting for yourself, not voting for what popular Kathy thinks or sweet Steve, but you. So it's a misperception that costs us the chance to shape decisions when we don't all participate. And here's the biblical wisdom: where there is no counsel, the people fall or fail. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. I look at Proverbs 11:14 as a way to think of democracy in the ancient text, right? It's like a way of informing by a group. Uh, Jury of your peers is pretty cool. A bigger jury of a few hundred people on a poll, if it's a representative sample of the population, can predict a lot of things in terms of covering all the bases and making sure everybody's understood and part of the system. The greatest generation understood that when everyone chips in, the community makes better decisions. Blowing the lid off LID, leadership investment decisions, that's what we're doing here. And when you invest in your leadership with some data, so you're not just a bunch of guys sitting around the table, maybe involve some gals around the table, maybe some diversity, so you can get a good picture of what's going on from different parts of the group, or maybe have more than one meeting and make sure the CEO doesn't bombard everyone with his notion of how it should be when everybody else is completely resistant to it. I have worked with companies as big as Fred Meyer before they were owned by Kroger, we'll say, and the president did their own focus groups. It was kind of ridiculous, honestly, because he was a great guy, great manager, great CEO, and it was good for him to be doing that. But at times, you're thinking that's not the right person to be doing the focus group. He should be listening so he can hear and find a moderator that he trusts to be able to do that. And that isn't easy sometimes, especially for a CEO type who knows they can do a lot better than most of the world. Let me tell you about Roy Bardsley. He founded Bardsley Opinion Research in Portland, Oregon, and became trusted, respected, and he was a researcher. He also spun off people that got so good at research that they were able to go off and start their own thing and teach other people how to do research, including me. I am basically was downstream of him. And that's part of how I learned about him, because some of the people that I respected that understood what they were doing in research, even though they weren't necessarily the fastest researchers, because Roy was fastidious about data and crossing the T's and dotting the I's and really understanding what was going on in his data before he said it's complete. Everything was double checked, triple checked, and made sure that it buttoned up so that he wouldn't have an error in his polls, right? And people left working for him because he was over the top about quality control. But quality, as we know, delivers results. And the data from Roy would show this. Why? Because Roy didn't just measure opinions, he respected them. He saw that every survey response was a person, not a number. And that's a leadership lesson. When you value people's opinions, you build trust. Some people don't. A lot of market researchers don't. And it gets to a point where you can become cynical about all the people having a misperception compared to you. But guess what? Our opinions change when we learn the world isn't flat, when we learn things that we're going to learn fast with AI. And if you're not open to AI right now, you need to step out of the way and listen to the people that do, because AI is coming. Last week, I learned about Bosch is going to get rid of 13,000 people. Now, that's a lot more than computers removing 15 people who were medical workers from a hospital system who no longer had to do paper records, right? 15 people or something like that. 13,000. They're going to be replaced by AI in one organization. I didn't even know Bosch was that big. In my mind, they just think of them as 5 German guys building beautiful parts in Germany, but 13,000 people. When you ignore details and you ignore people's opinions, you lose influence. And we know that influence is about everything in leadership. In fact, that's the definition that I go by for leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Part 5 of this podcast is employees' opinions in today's workplace. This is really important. So hang on and maybe even write down some of these stats. Inside a company, there are opinions and some famous ones like when the Mustang was faster than the Porsche or the Volvo station wagon was faster than Porsche. Only Volvo had the guts to go up against Porsche in a race in an advertisement. Ford decided not to because the public did not believe that it was faster. So why advertise about it? People wanted the Mustang for other reasons and didn't necessarily care about Porsche. So it worked out, but at times you wonder if they would have gone back, how big an icon Mustang would have been, even bigger than it is now. And it's big now. Let's pivot to the workplace. Employees today hold all kinds of perceptions, and I would say misperceptions, about time and rest. Take this vacationing on the company dime. 41% of workers admitted to taking time off in 2025 without officially requesting vacation. They just pretended to work while actually away, and 39% plan to do that in the summertime this year. That's 2025. Who leads the way? Gen Z workers at 66%. That's 66% of Gen Z workers think it's okay to be away without pre-approved notions or paperwork that we used to have to do in the old days with HR. Executives, executives too. The C-suite does it too. Almost as bad as Gen Z, 65%. And that's big time payroll dollars. Interestingly, fully in-person workers are also among frequent quiet vacationers. Why do they do it? Saving PTO for later, fear of looking less dedicated, hoping for a payout of unused days are some of the reasons people give, but they're also having anxiety about layoffs. Not surprising at Bosch, right? They're going to get rid of 13,000. But how do they pull it off and keep up the appearances? Turns out their buddies are helping them and they're answering emails while they're out. Emails, calls, doing all sorts of things to hide the fact that their true location isn't at work. They're even bypassing monitoring software or leaning on AI to fake productivity. AI can be used nefariously, and we covered that in the AI podcast. Here's the kicker. 37% said their employer found out. Their employer found out. Well, oftentimes the employer knows and they maybe just wait for the right opportunity to fire you because they know they have to get the work done. They don't know how they're going to do it. And it costs a lot to replace people. We covered that in another podcast. But 37% say their employer found out amongst those who did quiet quit. So about 40%, 2 out of 5 do the quiet vacationing, and 37% of those people said their employer found out. And when that happened, promotions lost, raises denied, projects pulled. Some were even fired. I think that was about 16% of that group. So that's like 8%. And yet, more than half of these employees felt no guilt. That's the rough one for me. How can you take a quiet vacation and take away from investors and owners of the company and not feel like you're stealing just a little bit of guilt? It seems like, especially if you were talking to a person and doing the survey, you're angry, resentful, and revengeful if you don't feel any guilt. You're justified to go away. Not being treated so well, maybe, right? But anyway, they said they didn't have enough vacation days or felt like it was their way of pushing back up against rigid work policies. Here's the lesson for us leaders. Perception shapes behavior. Employees often think it's fine to coast, but excellence comes when people are trained to go the extra step, to ask, what else can I do to help? And that takes training. And that's not natural. Research backs it up. Most workers have to be taught proactively to seek more work. Leaders can model it and reward it and celebrate it. Here's where Seinfeld style humor comes in. Asking for more work is like refilling the snack bowl at the party. Nobody wants to do it, but everyone notices when it doesn't happen. But here's your inspiration and challenge, friends. Leadership is about shaping perception so they align closer with reality. The greatest generation gave their opinions because they believed it mattered. Roy Bardsley earned trust because he honored people's opinions and their voices. Today, we live in a distracted world. Cat videos, Netflix, binges, quiet vacations. But if we want to lead well, we need to model what Jesus taught. Let your eyes be your yes and your no be your no. Matthew 5:37. No faking, no quiet vacations, just integrity and excellence. Here's my challenge to you. If you're an employee, ask for more work when you finish your task. If you're a leader, reward that initiative. And when the survey hits your inbox, click it. Your opinion matters more than you think. That's today's episode of Opinions, and there's a lot more to this, and we can cover things. I'd love to hear your feedback. The Bow Leadership Group is here for you if you need us. And remember, leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being present, principled, and perceptive. And you can win over those 40% of people who think it's okay to be absent. And until next time, empower your leadership, elevate your image with God in mind. Have a blessed week.